Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today,
This can be a good one.
we're tackling a proposed law straight from France,
Okay.
and it's aimed at fighting Islamophobia.
Mm.
So we're going to be digging into a document, right, that lays out not just the legislation, but like all the arguments
Oh, like
behind it. It's really interesting stuff. But here's the thing. We're not just wading through like legal jargon. We're actually trying to figure out
yeah.
how an entire nation defines and deals with
Right.
such a complex,
It is complex. It's so timely, especially with,
isn't it?
the current social and political landscape.
Exactly. And you know what? It's not just some abstract idea. This document, like, hits us with some
Oh, yeah.
pretty heavy statistics. Right off the bat,
Like what?
a 57% jump in reported Islamophobic acts in France
Wow.
just this year,
Yeah.
adding up to 828 incidents.
Those numbers are alarming. Sadly, not unique to France, though.
Right.
We're seeing similar trends across Europe and globally. You know, this rise in intolerance toward Muslim communities has sparked so many debates.
Yeah.
And this proposed law is one attempt to address it. For sure.
Makes you think, you know?
Yeah.
Like, thinking about that level of hate aimed at any group is pretty unsettling.
Oh, absolutely.
So the document, it jumps right into this argument that existing French laws, they just aren't doing enough to protect French Muslims from this wave of Islamophobia, which I found interesting
Okay.
because France already has laws, right, against discrimination based on
Right.
race, origin, religion, some dating back to the 70s.
Oh, wow. So, like, there's
Yeah.
already stuff on the books.
Yeah. So I was looking into that a little bit,
Right.
like the 1972 law against incitement to racial hatred,
Okay.
or the 1990 law against racist, anti-Semitic, or xenophobic acts.
And xenophobia, just
Yeah.
to clarify.
Yes.
That's the fear or hatred of foreigners or strangers,
Yeah.
just so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these laws exist, but they're being called into question now.
I know.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It feels like something has shifted, right? Like, why now?
Well, the document argues that these laws, while a good start, right,
Mhm.
they're too broad
Okay.
to effectively tackle the specific nuances of
Mhm.
Islamophobia.
Ah.
Like, for example, they might not fully cover things like
Yeah.
biased media portrayals or
Mhm.
subtle forms of discrimination that are harder to prove in court.
Okay, so that makes sense. But how do they propose to fix that?
Well-
What's their solution?
They emphasize the importance of creating a clear and precise legal definition
Oof.
of Islamophobia.
Oh.
It argues that without a specific definition, it's much harder to identify, prosecute,
Right.
and ultimately prevent these acts from
See,
happening.
so it's like trying to solve a problem without knowing exactly what you're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then how? How do you think they should define it?
Oh, that's
A loaded question, I know.
It really is. It's not just semantics. Defining something legally can have a huge impact on how it's understood and addressed.
Right.
The document suggests a definition that focuses on
Yeah.
prejudice, discrimination, or hostility
Okay.
directed at individuals or groups because of their perceived or actual adherence to Islam.
Okay.
But as you can imagine, even this definition is
Yeah.
open to debate.
For sure, because how do you determine what constitutes hostility or prejudice?
Exactly. That's the heart of the issue, to help illustrate their point.
Okay.
The document dives into specific examples
All good.
of Islamophobia.
Yeah, they get into things like verbal abuse, discrimination in housing and employment, biased media representations, even physical violence.
It's a lot.
It's sobering.
Yeah.
See it all laid out.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that Islamophobia,
Yeah.
it isn't just an abstract concept, right?
Right.
These examples, they highlight how it manifests in everyday life,
Yeah.
affecting real people in tangible ways.
Absolutely. But then it gets even trickier
Oh, how so?
because the proposed law also wants to criminalize speech deemed anti-Palestinian,
Okay.
arguing that it often goes hand in hand
Interesting.
with Islamophobia.
That's one of the most controversial elements, for sure, of the
Okay.
proposed law. It raises those fundamental questions about
Mhm.
free speech versus hate speech.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we draw the line between legitimate criticism of a government or ideology
Right.
and rhetoric that is intended to incite hatred or violence
Right.
against a group?
It's a tough one. Where do you draw that line? That's a debate that's been raging for years.
Oh, for sure.
And it's not getting any easier.
Yep.
To be honest, before like looking into this document, I
Yeah.
hadn't fully grasped the potential link
Yeah.
between like anti-Palestinian sentiment and Islamophobia.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It makes you think about those subtle ways bias can work. But let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
The document, it doesn't just focus on the legal side of things. It also explores the historical and social factors that led to this proposed law.
You're right. It dives into the history of Muslims in France,
Yeah.
which goes back centuries.
Oh, wow.
It highlights the contributions they've made to French society
Yeah.
while acknowledging the struggles
Yeah.
they've encountered.
It's fascinating, to see how intertwined Islam has been with French history.
I know.
You have like early Muslim communities in regions like Septimini.
Oh,
It's a historical region in southern France, and Provence. And then you have Muslim soldiers fighting for France in World War I. It's not a recent phenomenon at all.
Exactly. The document even mentions the construction of the Grande Mosquée de Paris in 1926.
I've seen pictures. It's a beautiful mosque.
It is. It's a real symbol of
Yeah.
the long-standing presence of Islam in France.
Yet, despite this long history, the document argues that French Muslims, they're experiencing a level of Islamophobia unlike anything they've seen before.
It connects this to a few different factors, like the rise of far-right political movements across Europe,
Okay.
global conflicts.
Involving Muslim-majority countries, and how those conflicts are portrayed in the media.
So it's not just about, like, isolated incidents of prejudice. It's about a broader social climate
Exactly.
that has become increasingly hostile towards Muslims.
Precisely, the document even uses the term
What is it?
Islamophobia d'atmosphere,
Oh, wow.
which basically describes a pervasive atmosphere of Islamophobia. It's like it's in the air you breathe, even if it's not always explicit or violent.
I can see how that would be. Incredibly unsettling, almost like a chilling effect, where people are afraid to express their faith or even their cultural identity openly for fear of backlash.
And that fear goes against
Yeah.
the French Republic's
Yeah.
core values of equality and fraternity
Right.
for all its citizens,
Yeah.
which the document emphasizes.
Yeah, it's a powerful point. It raises the question of how do you counter this trend? Is legislation like this proposed law the right way to go? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a complex question without a simple answer.
The document makes a case for stronger legal measures, arguing that existing laws, they just aren't equipped to deal with the specific challenges of Islamophobia. But there are other approaches.
Oh, okay. Like what?
Other countries are grappling with similar issues and have implemented different strategies. Some have opted for broader hate speech laws that cover a wider range of protected characteristics, not just religion. Others focus more on education and interfaith dialogue to promote understanding and tolerance.
So it's almost like a global experiment with each country trying to find that sweet spot between protecting free speech and combating discrimination.
Exactly. There's no magic formula.
Right.
What works in one context might not be effective or even appropriate in another.
That's a good point. It seems like understanding the nuances is crucial here.
Absolutely. And that's what I find so interesting about this deep dive. It's not just about understanding one proposed law. In France, it's about grappling with a global phenomenon and exploring different ways to address it.
For sure. So what can we learn from other countries' approaches? Are there any examples that stand out?
There are definitely a few worth looking at. For example, in the UK, they have specific legislation against religiously aggravated hate crimes.
Oh, okay.
Which includes Islamophobia. This means that if someone commits a crime motivated by hostility towards someone's religion, the sentence can be more severe.
So it's like acknowledging the added layer of harm
Exactly.
when a crime is motivated.
By prejudice. And that approach has been somewhat successful in addressing hate crimes, but it also has its critics.
Of course.
Some argue that it's difficult to prove the motivation behind a crime and that these laws can be misused to stifle legitimate criticism.
That's interesting. It seems like there's always a balancing act.
There is.
What about other examples?
Another approach is to focus on prevention through education and awareness raising. Germany, for instance, has invested heavily in programs that promote interfaith dialogue and understanding, especially among young people.
Oh, interesting.
The idea is to combat prejudice before it takes root.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But tackling ingrained societal biases through education, that must be a huge undertaking.
It is, and it requires like long-term commitment and investment. There's no quick fix when it comes to changing attitudes and behaviors. But many experts believe that, education and open dialogue, those are crucial to creating a more inclusive and tolerant society.
It seems like we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We started with this proposed law in France that aims to clearly define and criminalize Islamophobia. Then we got into like the debate about free speech versus hate speech, which is a real head scratcher.
It is. It's tough.
And now we're looking at all these different strategies countries are using to deal with Islamophobia around the world. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that there's no easy answer. Each approach has its own benefits and drawbacks, and what works in one country might not work in another.
Right.
The key is to keep the conversation going, learn from different perspectives, and to keep striving for a more just an equitable world.
Absolutely. This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. Like, what are the potential benefits and risks of this proposed law in France?
Right.
What kind of impact could it have on French society and even beyond?
That's a big question.
These are questions I hope our listeners will continue to ponder.
I agree, and I encourage everyone to learn more about this topic. There are many resources available,
Yes, for sure.
that explore the complexities of Islamophobia, hate speech legislation, and the experiences of Muslim communities around the world.
Knowledge is power, right?
It really is.
The more informed we are,
Yeah.
the better equipped you are to participate in these important conversations
Exactly.
and work towards a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp. Until next time, fellow deep divers.